very much. So why are we all here? As I said, we believe all businesses are essential. We are against the designation of essential and non-essential. Like I said, they're essential to someone. Every one of them is needed. This is a wonderful community, but every business in this community is essential to this community, and it will thrive as all these businesses are open. We're going to hear today that the lockdowns and restrictions in place right now are simply not justifiable by the most current data. We're going to hear that, and it's true. I looked this morning, latest numbers, 99.99% of Albertans do not have COVID. 99.992% of Albertans are not hospitalized with COVID. 99.999% of Albertans are not in ICU with COVID. Do these numbers reflect a health crisis? Do these numbers rationalize the fear that people are living in and are promoted by the media? Do these numbers justify the lockdowns and the closures of business? Do these numbers justify the loss of our freedoms and rights? I say no. But there is a crisis in this province. It's a mental health crisis. It's a suicide crisis. It's a drug and alcohol abuse crisis. It's a family and spousal abuse crisis. It's a financial crisis. And not one of those crises were caused by COVID. Every one of them were caused by the COVID lockdowns. There's a difference. At this time, I'm going to ask Shondell Sabat to come up and speak. I'll just read a little bit about him first. Shondell is currently CFO for an international mining investment company and has previously worked at TD Energy, like me, Sampra Energy, Myrant, America's Energy Trading, Canada Energy, and Shell Canada. He likes to believe that he asks questions and seeks answers and offers that others may not, and is always looking for continuous improvement in himself and society. He believes we must continually ask, are we doing this right? And could we do this better? Shondell has a Bachelor of Commerce degree in Finance Honors and he is a Chartered Financial Analyst, a charter holder and past president of the Calgary CFA Society. He has served as a board member for public, private, and many volunteer boards. I'd like to welcome him up at this time.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming out today and hearing our speakers and showing support for your friends and neighbors. As was mentioned in my introduction, I do think of myself as an objective thinker. I remember being back in high school, and when we had debates, I would purposefully take the other side. I would, look at the side that I didn't think represented who I was, and maybe that I didn't really believe. And I would argue that point. And the purpose of that, I thought, was just try to have a willingness to see both sides of an issue, give respect to both sides, and then use that as an opportunity to share ideas so that we could all make better informed decisions. And it's with that lens that I'm here today. I'm here simply to ask a few critical questions and hope that everyone will use this as a foundation to ask their own questions. Questions for themselves, of others, and especially of our decision makers. Firstly, I do want to mention that all death is tragic, and it does bring sorrow and heartache to those who are left behind. So I in no way want to minimize those who have been affected by COVID, but I think we all need to ask, was this all really worth it? I know of more people who have committed suicide or died a death of despair during this time than I do anyone who passed away from COVID. I believe these deaths would not have occurred if the lockdowns had not taken place to the severity that they have. There's a lot of evidence that suggests as unemployment rises, deaths of despair increase. We have seen this all across the world and continue to see it today. Early on in this COVID story, and even still today, we're told that we're in this together. My belief is that can't be further from the truth. We're in the same storm for sure, but we're not all on the same ship. Some of us are on a five-star luxury liner, and some of us are drowning at sea. And I'm seeing more and more drowning at sea every day. We all stand here today in support of our fellow Albertans who are genuinely concerned about the livelihoods of friends and neighbors. There are many data points that highlight the devastation following our province. Something caught my eye in early March, and it relates to where's the money going? The Fraser Institute, who I have a lot of respect for, has reported that since COVID began, job losses in the province have been concentrated in the private sector. Private sector employment has fallen by 6.4% from January 2020 to from February 2020 to January 2021. Compare this to the employment gains of 2.9% in the government sector. So, put differently, almost 100,000 jobs were lost in Alberta's private sector, while the government sector actually grew by more than 12,000 jobs. In addition, of the Alberta government's total spending of a little over $54 billion, 50% of it is spent on wages and benefits for government employees. I think these two facts alone could help us to understand the reasons for the difference of opinion on lockdowns. The question I would ask is, do our decision makers really feel the pain of what is going on? In the past year, have any of them really had to suffer the same as local business owners and regular citizens of this province? Have they lost wages? Have they faced bankruptcy? Or have they been part of a family that could not afford to feed themselves? I know they say they feel for Albertans, but do they really? People are much more empathetic, compassionate, and motivated if they have experienced something in the past or are currently experiencing it. All of the decisions that have been made about lockdowns are being made by government officials. No wonder getting traction is difficult. I'm not making any accusations, nor am I making any criticisms. I'm just asking a question. If all of the decisions are being made by those that are not suffering economically any adverse consequences, would different decisions be made if the composition of the decision makers was different?
Yeah.
I won't go into too many statistics here. They're all readily available and widely reported. But here is what we know for a fact about COVID, and we have known this for a long time. Number one, Alberta has had approximately 1,900 deaths attributed to COVID. That's still fewer than the number that die yearly from dementia or heart disease. Number two, the average age of an Albertan that dies from COVID is 81. This is the same as the average life expectancy of an Albertan. Number three, nobody under the age of 20 has died from COVID in Alberta. Compare this to 2019, when 400 Albertans under the age of 20 passed away. Number four, the Globe and Mail has reported that 80% of Canadian COVID deaths occurred in long-term care facilities. That means that here in Alberta, fewer than 400 Albertans outside of long-term care facilities have died. That's less than 0.01% of Alberta's population. As a comparison, in 2019, 14,000 Albertans under the age of 80 passed away. And number five, our deficit will rise an additional $7.4 billion from previous estimates. That means an extra $1,700 per person in Alberta, or $7,000 for a family of 4. That's just to cover the additional deficit that was recently announced. That's on top of the $16.8 billion deficit that was previously announced. So Alberta is going to be running a total deficit of $24 billion. And number 6, the CDC's own data shows that the survival rate for COVID is 99.99% for people under the age of 50 and 99.5% for those aged 50 to 70. So what does all this tell us? It tells us very clearly that number 1, COVID affects those in long-term care facilities, and that a targeted approach would have saved lives. We knew where the problem was, and we know where it still is, yet we continue to not focus the resources where they're needed the most. 80% of the problem is in one spot. Number 2, COVID has little impact on people who are young and people who are healthy. Number 3, locking down the economy will prove to have done more harm than good, as deaths of despair continue to increase. As deaths of despair continue to increase due to unemployment and loneliness, which are a direct result of lockdowns. And number 4, although monthly COVID deaths are higher than in recent flu seasons, they're still lower than the flu seasons of 2008, 2005, and 1999. My points are the same as pretty much everybody in this crowd, and I'm sure we'll hear more. But the evidence is clear. So why are so many still so scared? I'm going to highlight a few answers. These aren't the right answers, but I think they would provide a good foundation for healthy debate. Number 1, the World Health Organization has been a leader in the fight against COVID, and most countries have been very reluctant to embrace any policies that are contrary to their thinking. In fact, in May of last year, YouTube said that it would not allow content that spreads medical misinformation, including claims about vaccinations that contradict expert consensus from local health authorities or the World Health Organization. Yet, as an example, I look at a country like Taiwan. Taiwan has had one of the best records in fighting COVID, yet they're not a member of the World Health Organization. Canada has had 591 deaths per million people, and Taiwan has had 0.4. Could we not have learned something from these people? Number 2, and this one is particularly important. I study behavioral finance, and a lot of that relates as to how or why people make decisions. So I want to highlight how are decision makers motivated. We know that the government payrolls have increased, and we know that government workers continue to receive full, uninterrupted pay, while the private sector continues to get decimated. There's no shared suffering, and until there is, there's unlikely to be much of a shift in the very conservative approach to locking down the economy. Let's ask our decision makers to cut their pay in half until the private sector... Thank you. Let's ask our decision makers to cut their pay in half until the private sector employment is back to where it was prior to COVID. I wonder if this would spur creative thinking and a sense of shared hardship. Number 3, Albertans were told in December that additional lockdown measures were needed and required to prevent a run on the healthcare system, specifically the number of ICU beds. My understanding that there are 272 ICU beds in Alberta. The facts are that we have never come close to utilizing or occupying all of the beds, and we currently sit at a 16% utilization rate. The risk has been drastically reduced, as the decision makers like to say, through the hard work of Albertans. As of March March 18th, we have been under 300 hospitalizations and have been there for over 3 weeks. This was the target that the government had set in order for us to move into step 3 of reopening. We are well within the guidelines set to move into step 3. This should just be done. No debate, no discussion. It just needs to be done. What needs to be emphasized here is that the hardship that the lockdowns have created will forever shape us for generations to come. Not only that, but the financial and emotional toll has been and will be something that will be felt for generations. Let's remember, we did not finish paying for World War II until the 1970s. We must all ask ourselves, and our leaders, without judgment, criticism, or divisiveness, to do and be better, and to learn from the past, not to pat ourselves on the back. We're going to see this again. And in this audience know that when that happens, we cannot and must not answer the call the way we have in the past year. There is another way. Let's do what we can to get that message to the